We reviewed so far, right? We reviewed the history of halakha very briefly from the time of the Torah to the time of the Shulchan Aruch. And now we're getting sort of to the modern period, which is the last 500 years, we could say, the Renaissance in Europe, and then the Emancipation, the Enlightenment, and then all the...
Emancipation was 200 years later.
Yeah, I'm saying, within those 500 years, you have all these events. You have the Renaissance, slowly it evolves towards the Emancipation, the Enlightenment, then the two world wars, many cataclysmic events and new movements that develop within the Jewish people. We'll have to talk about the geography of Jewish communities at the time of the publication of the Shulchan Aruch and the book of the Rema that came right after it. And from there, we have to go back and see what are the cultural and other type of influences that existed over the world of halakha. So immediately after the publication of the Shulchan Aruch, a book came out. Remember, we mentioned that Moshe Isserles in Poland was writing a book similar to the book of Rabbi Yosef Karo that had the same idea of writing a commentary on the Arba'at Turim of Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Rabbeinu Asher and present it to the public. But Rabbi Yosef Karo beat him to it. He was the first one to publish the book. So when Rabbi Moshe Isserles in Poland saw that, he decided to not publish his book. He published it later, called Haim Ovadia. But what he did, he just added his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch itself. Whenever he had a different practice, he would say, but our practice is this and that. Because he felt that Rabbi Yosef Karo did not fully represent the European customs. And that is, even though Rabbi Yosef Karo tried to include as much as possible the Ashkenazi customs that he was aware of, but there was much that he was unaware of, because that was literature and practices that developed deep within Europe, in Germany, in Poland, in Eastern Europe. And Rabbi Yosef Karo didn't have contact with all of that. With the main books of halakha, of course, he had the books of Jewish law. He was familiar, but there are other books. There are other what they call sifra minhagim, practices, things that evolve. Each city, each synagogue, things that not necessarily are written down, and Rabbi Moshe Isserles were aware of. So, so those two books are out there, and the Jewish diaspora at the time. This is in the 1500s, shortly after the expulsion from Spain. So we know if it's almost like the Big Bang. How the Jews split when they came out of Spain. They moved first from Spain to Portugal. We're talking about more or less 250,000 Jews. So there's a lot of people. No, so 250,000 people started moving out of Spain. Some of them went to Portugal first, but they were driven away after a couple of years again. And the majority of these Jews arrived in the Netherlands and the Ottoman Empire. Those were the two main countries that absorbed them. And not only that, the Sultan at the time of the Ottoman Empire sent ships to pick up. He helped the Jews travel from Spain to the Ottoman Empire, and he had a vision. He realized that the growth and success of the Spanish Empire had to do with the Jews, and he wanted to welcome them in. And indeed, the Ottoman Empire, with all the difficulties of the Jews, that there were some difficulties there, was very welcoming to Jewish life until World War I, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. And part of the Ottoman Empire, people usually think Turkey. That's part of it, but also Syria, Lebanon, were part of the Ottoman Empire at the time. So Jews arrived from Spain to all these places, and in Syria, for example, they were called Francos because they were looked as more European. So they integrated into the. They didn't integrate immediately into the Jewish community. They kept their traditions for a while. Same in Turkey. There was the local population, the Jews of the Balkan, of Salonika, of what today is called considered Greece, but then was Greece, Turkey, Bulgaria, Rhodes, right? Egypt, yeah, Jews they arrived to Egypt. They also, like I said, in the Netherlands, mainly in Amsterdam, there was the American community. Some of them later on migrated to London, but that was only in the time of Cromwell when the British lifted the ban against the existence of Jews in England, because there was an expulsion from England in the I think it was late 1200s. Jews were not allowed to live in England, but then the ban was lifted and Jews came, and they came as nobility. The British understood it also because of their conflict with the Spanish. That's why they opened the gates and they let the Jews in, and Jews came with a lot of connections, knowledge in business, and not all of them were at this high status. It was devastating. Just the idea of migrating, packing up, and leaving was not easy. But they established themselves. They're interesting curiosity. I mean, later on, within the history of Jews in London, there was a Jewish pirate, Shmuel Palachi. That was the last name that later on migrated to Turkey. Famous family, Palachi family, who operated as with pirates, but he would only attack Spanish ships as revenge for the expulsion, and they would only rob, like sort of serving the British Empire. But that is a side story. So Jews lived there in the Netherlands, in the Ottoman Empire, and also in the New World. They traveled to wherever they could in the New World, to Brazil, in Recife, to Peru. They arrived in different places, and the Inquisition went after them. The Inquisition right away established branches in the New World. It was not easy for the Jews to live there either. And some of these Jews who left Spain migrated all the way into Europe and settled in Germany and other places. And that's why we have a tremendous growth of Ashkenazi Jewry after the Spanish expulsion, because there was an influx of Jews coming from Spain who later on integrated into the Ashkenazi communities. On the other hand, so this is the Spanish diaspora. It sort of bursts out of Spain and it comes to new countries, but also to places where there are already Jewish communities, and their customs for about 100 to 200 years clash with the local customs, and they also see themselves wherever they are as a diaspora within a diaspora. As the one exile, they used to refer to themselves as La Nación, the nation. Because they are the nation that came out of Spain, and they kept the Ladino for hundreds of years. Another large contingency, like one of the most stable communities in terms of geography and no serious migrations, was the North African community from Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco. All these communities, they had a consistent presence in the area for at least 2,500 years. Some say 2,800 years. Some scholars say that Jews lived in Morocco and North Africa for about 800 years before the Common Era. They got there with the Phoenicians, the seafarers from Lebanon. They got there and they actually affected the language of the Berbers and their culture. But even without that, at least from the destruction of the Second Temple, Jews lived in Morocco and in North Africa, and they had their very clear and established culture. There were waves of migration that came from other places and got swallowed within the Moroccan community before the expulsion, mainly from Iraq in the 1200s, 1300s. Thousands of Jews from Babel, from Iraq, migrated because of problems there. and basically drained the Iraqi community. You don't hear anything about Iraqi Jews or the Jews of Babylonia from the 1200s to the 1600s. For about 400 years, Iraq was not hospitable. I mean, there were Jewish communities, but the leading scholars and a lot of the people migrated mostly to Morocco, but also to Iran, and some went beyond Iran into Bukhara and into Kazakhstan, into those places in the. So we're talking about the Sephardic community. Then you have also a cluster of the Yemenite community that was somewhat isolated. They were connected in Yemen through the merchants who used to travel from the Middle East to the Far East, and also from North Africa. They had this connection. But other than that, in terms of religion, a lot of them, unless we talk about the communities who were on the route, like Aden, that was the seaport that people traveled through. There were thousands of other communities spread all throughout Yemen, and they adhered to Maimonides, to the law of Maimonides, mostly without change until the 20th century. But with the publication of the Shulchan Aruch and the invention of the printing press, it did affect some of these areas. Then, this is what we call the Sephardic world. Then the Ashkenazi world, there are the Jews of Western Europe, Germany, and parts of France, and the Jews of Eastern Europe that started really thriving as a community in Poland only when Poland became a kingdom, and the first king, Kazimir, or Krzyżemierz probably it was called in Poland, invited the Jews to come, I think in the late 1500s or something like that. But very, very soon they came from all over. There were Jews in Russia, in Lithuania, and they had their own practices, mostly based on what Jews because they came from Western Europe, what Jews in Germany and Austria and northern France, what is called Alsace-Lorraine, used to, they already had their established practice for 500-600 years. So this is just when you think about the Jewish diaspora, at the time of the publication of the Shulchan Aruch, they're spread all over the world. They have their roots and origins connected to two main centers, Babel, Babylonia, Spain, North Africa, on one hand, this is one branch, and Germany, and northern France on the other hand. And the place where you have least the smallest number of Jews at the time, where was it? Of what we know today as the Jewish world, not talking about the Americas, Israel. In the land of Israel, which at the time was just part of the Ottoman Empire, and it was actually, I think it was part of the province of Syria. It was just one large province called Syria, which included, not Syria, Haleb, included Lebanon and all that. Israel was part of that. There was a pasha, there was a local pasha, a peha, who usually governor appointed by the Turks, by the Ottoman Empire, who usually dwelled either in the north in Akko, and there were in all of Israel several hundred families, mostly in Tzefat, and some in Jerusalem, and there's some scattered around the country. Now, why is that important? Because one of the main arguments of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef in the 20th century, when he argued that all Jews must follow the rulings of Rabbi Yosef Karo to the letter, and all their practices don't count when they confront the laws of Rabbi Yosef Karo, one of his arguments was that now Israel is the center of Jewish life. And Rabbi Yosef Karo was, at his time, the chief rabbi of the land of Israel. And because he was the chief rabbi, this is called in halachic language called Marad Atra, the master of the locale or of the locality. So he's the master of the land of Israel. So everybody who lives in Israel must follow his rules. And he said that even for Ashkenazim, he said it doesn't matter, you're Sephardi or Ashkenazi, you live in Israel, you have to follow Rabbi Yosef Karo. After a while, he saw that it doesn't sit well with Ashkenazim. He said, well, all the Sephardim have to follow Rabbi Yosef Karo. It didn't sit well with the Sephardim either. Iraqi Jews, Moroccan Jews, and others said, that's not our practice. And as a matter of fact, this is really not the way of halakha. You can't come and say, we're going to go back to the original book that was written 500 years ago. And we follow it to the letter. Because there were many changes and many individual decisions or decisions of rabbis, of communities, based on their needs and their times. You cannot undo 500 years of history with one stroke. But he was very consistent, and he basically went to war against anyone who disagreed with him. So
the main problem with it is that it's turning the oral law into a written law.
Yes. No,
it's turning it into a written law, because if everyone follows what Rabbi Yosef Karo, then there is no other, because it's all written, it's all there.
Right. No, it becomes very rigid. Right.
And that defeats the whole purpose of the oral law. That's
right.
Not what the oral law is intended to be.
Right. But besides that, the big problem is that, as I mentioned previously, Rabbi Yosef Karo didn't write a final halakha everywhere. In many cases, he would write the halakha as some say this and some say that. Or he would say, that's the halakha, but some say this. Or he would reverse the formula. Some say, and this is the halakha. So it's called stam v'yeshomrim, or yeshomrim v'stam, or yeshomrim v'yeshomrim. Different formulas of halakha, and now everybody's perplexed. How do you determine the halakha when he gives you 2 or 3 options? So there's a whole literature of klalei Abet Yosef, the rules of ruling. So to come and say there's only one way is very difficult. So, and we'll talk about that. What were the conflicts with each group of the rabbis? I know from my tradition, like the Iraqi tradition, my grandfather told me when I was a kid, and we were talking about halachot. He says that one of his friends saw the book of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef in a friend's house. It just came out, some of his halachot. So he asked him, why do you need this book? Like, you're an Iraqi Jew, we have the halachot of the Ben Ish Hai. Rabbi Yosef Haim was the leading halachic authority for Iraqi Jews. So he said, what do you mean? I needed to study halakha. He said, no, you don't need this book. You take our book, Ben Ish Hai. And now he said, if you want to really follow Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, he says, take our book, the Ben Ish Hai. Ashat ayn maktub, sawi bil maklub. He said, take our book. Whatever you see that our rabbi wrote in the Ben Ish Hai, do the opposite, and you get the law of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. Anyway, we'll talk more about it tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem.